Welcome to Mind Shield. We protect the mind and pursue the truth. Let's get started.
Today, we're separating three different things that are too often mashed together: what is physically plausible, what is speculative, and what real evidence would have to show. This presentation is not built to dismiss lived experience. It is built to discipline the analysis, because in this territory, confusion is the predator. There are documented RF and microwave effects in human and animal literature. There are also patents, military concepts, and decades of rumor, fear, and extrapolation. But those are not the same category of proof. A patent is not a fielded weapon, a strange symptom is not a solved mechanism, and a compelling story is not a measurement. So the question guiding this deck is simple. If someone claims remote neurotargeting, what does physics allow? What does engineering resist? And what would evidence need to show before we cross the line from suspicion into proof? Before we argue, we need a shared vocabulary. Interferometry means combining waves and extracting information from how they reinforce or cancel each other. Phased arrays are antenna systems that steer beams electronically without moving the hardware. RF and microwave refer to carrier frequencies used in radar and communications. EEG and evoked potentials are tiny electrical patterns measured from the brain, usually in microvolts. And signal-to-noise ratio is the brutal gatekeeper behind any sensing claim. Can the signal be separated from the background, or is it buried alive? Then there's the microwave auditory effect, sometimes called the Frey effect. That part matters because it is real. Under pulsed conditions, some people can perceive clicks, buzzes, or sound-like sensations generated inside the head. But even here, the existence of one effect doesn't grant every stronger claim that gets chained to it. That's the rhythm of this deck. Define carefully, then refuse to let language outrun physics. Here is the ground we can stand on. The microwave auditory effect is documented. Brief pulsed microwave exposure can trigger a tiny thermal expansion event that launches a pressure wave, which is picked up by the cochlear system as a click, buzz, or sometimes speech-like perception. Alan Frey's early work is central here, and later research explored how pulse structure affects perception. But notice the catch. This is not mind reading. It is not remote behavioral control. It is not a magical wireless pipeline into complex thought. It is a thermoacoustic phenomenon with a narrow and specific meaning. And the second catch is just as important. To produce those effects reliably, you are not dealing with a whisper of energy. You are dealing with pulsed conditions that push serious peak power. So yes, the effect is real. But reality here is stubborn and expensive. The physics gives you a phenomenon, then hands you a bill. One of the biggest conceptual traps in this whole subject is the false marriage between biological frequencies and carrier frequencies. Brain rhythms live in slow territory. Delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma. Single digits to maybe a few dozen hertz in broad terms. Radio and microwave carriers live millions to billions of cycles higher. That is not a gap. That is a canyon. The brain is not a radio tower broadcasting rich internal thought into free space. Neural activity is weak, local, smeared by tissue, and incredibly hard to isolate even with electrodes on the scalp. So when someone leaps from the brain has electrical activity to therefore it can be remotely read like a Wi-Fi signal, they've skipped the hardest pages in the book. This slide is the first hard break. Biological rhythms and RF carriers do not naturally line up in the way pop explanations pretend. Now let's take on the cinematic idea. Multiple beams crossing inside a target to create a hidden point of concentrated energy. On paper, in controlled geometry, wave interference is real. In a vacuum, in a lab, in simplified media, you can model elegant intersections. But a human target is not a polished test object. It's a moving, layered, lossy, water-rich structure wrapped in a dynamic environment. Real tissue refracts, absorbs, scatters, and shifts phase. The target breathes. The skull isn't uniform. Urban environments throw back multipath reflections like a hall of mirrors, so the fantasy of a stable, controllable, secret focus inside a moving human head from standoff beams runs into a very rude reality. The medium fights back. In other words, the math may flirt with possibility, but the environment files for divorce. Engineering is where many sleek theories go to die. This slide drives the knife deeper. The body is not transparent to all useful frequencies. Higher frequencies can be focused more tightly, but they also get absorbed more readily at the surface. Lower frequencies penetrate more deeply, but they demand larger antennas and don't focus neatly. That's the targeting paradox. To get through skin, bone, cerebrospinal fluid, and into meaningful neural depth with precision, you need a frequency-power geometry combination that keeps slipping through your fingers. Too high, and you burn or scatter before depth. Too low, and your beam control becomes clumsy and conspicuous. There's no free lunch here, only trade-offs. This is why talk of deep brain satellite precision or invisible consumer scale targeting should trigger skepticism. The skull is not just a container, it is an adversarial filter. The body itself is a security system written in anatomy. Here, the presentation makes a crucial distinction. Some RF effects are verified, some are plausible only under impractical conditions, and some are physically implausible without implants or direct contact. Superficial heating is real. The microwave auditory effect is real. Those belong in the documented column. But real-time remote thought reading from free space? That slams into the signal-to-noise barrier. Deep brain targeting through satellite communications bands? That crashes into attenuation and power limits. Covert tracking of internal neural states through ordinary consumer Wi-Fi, at best speculative and unverified. This matters because once every claim is treated as equally credible, analysis collapses. A serious investigator has to rank phenomena by evidentiary weight, not emotional force. Not all strange things are impossible, but not all proposed mechanisms survive contact with measurement. That distinction is the whole game. Patents are often used like courtroom exhibits in public arguments, but a patent proves something narrow, that someone described an idea in a format recognized as novel enough to examine. It does not prove the system was built, validated, miniaturized, deployed, or scaled under real-world conditions. Yes, there are patents touching RF hearing effects, remote monitoring concepts, and various brain state or stimulation schemes. There are also military research concepts exploring non-lethal and directed energy applications. That tells us institutions have imagined, pursued, and documented possibilities. It does not tell us that the physics barriers vanished on command. So the right posture is neither naive dismissal nor patent worship. It's this: concepts matter, prototypes matter more, field evidence matters most. Between a filing cabinet and an operational covert capability lies a canyon called engineering. This is where modern anxiety likes to hitch a ride on modern infrastructure. Starlink and similar systems use phased array communications technology, and that sounds ominous if you stop at the phrase. But communications phased arrays are built to relay data efficiently between terminals and satellites, not to perform precision neurotargeting on moving people through roofs, walls, and skulls. The power densities involved at ground level after propagation are in the communications domain, not the secret brain lancing from orbit domain. To turn that architecture into a covert neuroweapon would require not just a hidden intent, but a radically different power, sensing, and targeting regime than what the infrastructure is designed to do. So the lesson is simple. Advanced beam steering does not equal omnipotent control. A satellite internet dish is not a wizard staff. Sometimes a router is just a router, boring, profitable, and terrestrial in its ambitions. If there is one slide to tattoo on the forehead of this debate, it's this one: signal-to-noise ratio. Brain signals are tiny. Even in a clinic, EEG is conductive, contact-based, filtered, averaged, and still messy. Strip away electrodes, add distance, add a skull, add city RF clutter, and the problem becomes savage. Remote neural monitoring sounds elegant in language because language is cheap. But engineering asks rude questions. Where is the captured signal? How strong is it? What is the sensor? What bandwidth is used? How is the source separated from ambient noise? And where is the validation dataset? Without answers, remote neural monitoring is not a demonstrated capability. It is a label floating above an unsolved measurement problem. Physics doesn't care how badly someone wants the answer. If the signal cannot be isolated, there is no readout, only storytelling. This slide pulls the whole paradox together. The most documented effects tend to require the most brute force, and brute force is loud. High peak power demands infrastructure, line of sight, hardware, cooling, and geometry. In other words, the more dramatic the real physical effect, the less covert the apparatus becomes. Meanwhile, the systems people imagine as stealthy, consumer Wi-Fi, smart meters, ordinary background RF, sit on the low power end where no demonstrated biological mechanism matches the grander claims. That creates the feasibility barrier. If you want meaningful tissue impact or a documented auditory effect at a distance, the system becomes harder to hide. If you want invisibility and deniability, you usually lose the power needed to achieve the claimed effect. So the fantasy wants both: massive impact and perfect stealth. Physics offers a colder answer: pick one, and even then pay dearly. And this is where the presentation lands. Evidence must rise above experience alone. To prove an active remote electromagnetic attack on an individual, you would need at least three things. First, physical dosimetry, measurable RF power at the target site that matches known biological thresholds for the claimed effect. Second, spectrum analysis, forensic detection of a pulsed carrier signature occurring at the same time as the event. Third, geometry, a mapped physical line of sight from a capable transmitter to the target. Without those artifacts, claims remain unresolved. Maybe something happened. Maybe the mechanism is misunderstood. Maybe the story outran the instrument, but proof lives in measurement. That's the final note of this deck. Not cynicism, not surrender, discipline. In a world full of invisible systems, the answer is not to believe everything. It is to document relentlessly, test hard, preserve the chain of evidence, and force reality to leave fingerprints.